Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on where you are in the world when you're logging into this session. Oh my goodness, my name is Jessica Corbo, and it brings me tremendous joy to share this space with one of my dear friends, Megan. Now, if you don't already know, May is Mental Health Awareness Month. Mental health is something that everyone should prioritize, because if you don't prioritize your health, you're going to be forced to make time for an illness later. And Megan is probably one of my most treasured hidden gems on LinkedIn. LinkedIn is one of my favorite playgrounds. And we met a couple of years ago when I first started getting a little bit heavy into creating content. And as a profession, that's what Megan does. And she helps people find their voice, create content, and just do like their branding and go to the next level. And so she piqued my interest on a professional side, and I just fell in love with her as a person, and she became part of like my extended family. And so when we were talking about what are we doing for mental health extravaganza and what are the different things, and knowing that she not only is a strong human being on every different capacity, but she's a business owner, she's a mom, she's, I don't know, living in one of the best places in the entire world, the land down under, Australia. And I thought that would be a lot of value for all of our listeners and kind of bridge the gap between the West and West, but the far West. So with that said, hi, Megan, how are you doing today?
Good morning, good afternoon, and all of that. Yes, thank you. Thank you. What a beautiful intro. Thanks, Jess.
Well, thank you so much for having time to share this space with us.
Always. Look, it's yeah, can't have too much of this kind of thing. I think it just expands in every direction. So
Absolutely.
I love it.
Absolutely. Well, I know that red is your signature color, so we're going to make sure to highlight that and flag for everybody. And as we jump into it, have you ever been diagnosed with any kind of mental health ailments or complications?
I did many years ago. I was.
What were you diagnosed with?
Depression. And then it turned out to be a genetic thing, which I didn't discover until 20 years later. Wow. So I shook off a lot of things back in the day because I didn't like being muted by the conventional treatments that were around then. And there was a lot of confinement in, like, this is your mum, this is your grandmother, this is you, therefore by default you are predisposed, blah blah blah. But they were never looking at it from a genetic point of view. They were only looking at it as an environmental, you're a bit sensitive and all of these kinds of things, and the best way to treat it is to medicate, and you know the drill. So I fell into that space very by default. And years later, a GP who happened to be a little more on the holistic side of things just said, hey, have you ever had this particular test for a mutation? Never heard of it. Let's do it. And up pops a funky thing that affects vitamin absorption. And that sets off a cascade of psychological and neurotransmitter-based things, as well as all sorts of other immune function challenges. So boom, there was the crux of my problem. And my son has it as well. So I'm so grateful that I went through the hard yards, but at least I know now. And he's only just become a teenager, so we can leap on that right now and provide the right nutrition so that we don't put him where I ended up.
Absolutely. I think that's amazing. Consider yourself a cycle breaker.
Yes.
Because if this is something that happens with all the different generations, I think, being in the US, living internationally, but being based in the US right now, I think that there is a massive difference in the quality of nutrition that we receive. I think a lot of our, nutrition is actually nutrient void. And so people don't realize it because we've kind of genetically modified the bejeebers out of everything and things that have seeds in it anymore. So you're kind of having organic food that's not really organic. It's chock full of, other stuff. And I think I can tell the difference on how I feel, because after living in Singapore for 6 years and Hong Kong for 4 years, that's my baseline. Whether or not it's in my head or not, I don't know, jury's out. But since you're in Australia, I do know that the regulations are a lot stricter. So you guys pay attention to farming and you pay attention to all these different things. So you can grossly make a assumption
Mm.
that there's a lot more nutrient content in some of the stuff that's being offered into Australia. Is that kind of a good assumption to make?
Totally, totally. But it went beyond that, because this was something that required a non diet-based thing. It's a supplement thing, which,
Yeah.
there's a
Adds even
methylation
more.
process, and I don't pretend to know all the ins and outs of it.
Yeah.
I know the 0.1% that is enough to understand that I can't rely on my diet to get the right version of particular vitamins. But that's it.
Yeah,
That's
but at
it.
least it's like on top, so it's like a
Yes.
holistic,
Yes.
approach to it. So you're getting like a
Yeah,
solid
absolutely.
baseline, plus
Yes.
you get all the supplements that that your body actually requires and everything. So I'm really
Yes.
proud of you for not, falling into the business as usual. You were a patient advocate, like you advocated for yourself, right? And you're just like,
Yes.
okay, I accept this to a certain extent. Let's dig a little bit deeper. So I want to,
Exactly.
hold space and just commend you on that, because it takes a certain amount of bravery to be able to take your own health into your own hands.
Oh, thank you. Look, I just didn't want to feel like everything was being dulled down. And, I did the stuff that they told you not to do, like go cold turkey on medication and things like that, and then just have to live with the fallout in the short term. But yeah, you can't, that's not a life. That's just going through the motions.
Absolutely.
For the sake of something you don't understand.
Yeah. So when you were taking like the medicine kind of, like shuts everything down. Once you take the supplements, it helps you kind of, I guess, oversimplify, kind of wake up a little bit. So in context of you being able to have your businesses, what is kind of like the timeline of, and also with your son, what's the timeline of like when you got diagnosed, and then when you're on like the medication versus like when you did that shift into like the supplements, and then where did like the business, and the reason why I'm asking is because I'm trying to draw a picture on like the stress management and kind of like the ups and downs, because a lot of people don't realize that when you're a business owner, there is a tremendous amount of self-awareness and tenacity to keep going. And if you're struggling with something, it just makes it that much harder.
I think underneath it all, even before I went down the path of antidepressants and before the nutritional shifts and things, I was always an advocate for exercise. I was always doing something. I was the Lycra Brigade back in the late 80s, early 90s, doing the aerobics, Jane Fonda style,
Richard Simmons and Jane Fonda.
Yes,
my
yes,
homies.
totally. Denise Austin was my thing, but all of that stuff. And even when I was not going to gyms, I was doing it in my living room, wearing holes in my mum's carpet. So that has underpinned, I guess, the ability to ride through all of that and to at least have something to hang on to. But I started medication when I was about 20.
Okay.
And through till I was about 30.
Okay.
I went off everything several times, tried several different things. It all roads led to the same rubbish. And I had the genetic test, I think just around the time my son was born, in the early 2000s. So I had gone through a long period off the medication, but still feeling like something was never quite right. And I kept tweaking and refining my diet and my exercise and my, the meditation. I've always loved the yoga and meditation and Pilates and all of those kinds of things. But then I just doubled down on that stuff and it still wasn't hitting the mark. And, everybody has an opinion. All the non-experts have an opinion on how you should be managing that.
Absolutely.
So it's been a long time coming. It really has.
Yeah. I think a lot of times, especially in context of proactively taking care of your health, it's about all of these moving pieces, and it's a constant balance. So as long as you have that intention to kind of, this is our end goal, what do I need to do to get me there? And it's like, okay, I'm feeling a little bit off, let me go for a workout. I'm feeling a little down, let me work on my hydration and then maybe take my supplements. Or, oversimplify, you have to feel, and then kind of like where you need to ebb and flow. I'm a little manic, or I'm a little quick. worrying about the business. So maybe I need to jump in meditation, slow down, because you don't have enough time. That's exactly when you got to make the time.
Yes.
And
Yes.
so when you have like all these different kind of like moving pieces, I hear you like so loud on, being able to create like that lifestyle. And I guess if we take a step back and if you look at, big picture, as you go through all of that, for the sake of everyone that's listening and everyone that will be listening, you were actively taking control of your life, for your health journey specific. You were embracing motherhood, and at the same time, you're also building a business.
Yes.
So have you always built a business, or did you go from corporate into your own stuff?
I spent a long time in corporate.
Okay.
I really only
Yes.
ventured out once I went on maternity leave.
Yeah.
That was the end of my corporate career completely.
Yeah.
And I haven't gone back.
Yeah.
So that's a long time ago now. That's 13 years ago.
Absolutely. Well, congratulations. I mean,
Yeah.
it's a double-edged sword, right? Because on one
It
side,
is.
you're like, if I was in the right places and I got all the right tools and I can use these for like my business, and then
Yes.
for the other ones, and if it ends up being a place that you loved, but maybe you prioritize your freedom, then you have that tug of war with, do I really want to be on my own? I don't know. I kind of like all the people that I was with. It was a really good organization. And you got this tug of war
Yes.
going back and forth. I don't know. I was speaking from my personal experience. I'm projecting
No.
there.
you need time to experience both, though. I mean, it's like anything that it takes a while to get into, it takes a while to get out of. Same thing when you start the next new thing. I don't think I fully appreciated the freedom until there was a baby, until there were other life circumstances, leaving the marriage, rebranding the business to really stand strong on its own merits, rather than be white labeling the heck out of everything and working for agencies and being undercut and all of those sorts of things, but it's incremental. Look, it's still going.
Yeah. One of the things that I can really appreciate about all the content that you create is you take a lot of anecdotes and you take a lot of kind of like personal stories, and you're fun with it. So you take something that you've gone through or something that has happened during the day. It doesn't have to be like a big life event, it could be something a little bit more subtle, but you bring an element of joy and curiosity, and the art of storytelling that you share with the world, I think, is phenomenal. And maybe if you could shed a little bit of light on how maybe has the dealing with depression influenced any of that. One way of asking is specifically because a lot of people that I've worked with, in order to balance that out, it's a tug of war in the mind. So finding that curiosity and finding that silver lining and being able to slay those dragons has been like really powerful. Has that been one of like the foundational parts of like your business, or what's the connection between the lessons and that and like your company?
I guess what has provided a scaffolding has been my existing skill set. I've always been a writer.
You're a beautiful writer too, by the way.
Thank you. I played safe for a very long time though. I worked in a lot of conservative corporate environments where you didn't have a lot of scope. And if you did have some scope, it was earned after 4 or 5 years in the business, where you could start to be a little bit expressive, but even then you were writing for somebody else, not for yourself. And I think the beauty of social media obviously does have a less formal structure. LinkedIn finally is getting on board with a little less intensity and rigidity, but it comes down to the individual, and you need to allow yourself to feel. And if that means stop writing temporarily, like people will often say, I don't feel inspired, or when I'm having a bad day, I don't want to write. And a lot of the time my instinct is to try and coax them out of that using whatever tools I can draw on from my own experience. But you do hear those times where it just doesn't work, no matter what you do. And you do have to take a step back and allow something to move through, and to fall back on other strategies like moving your body, so that whatever energy is stuck there can be released.
Yeah.
Sometimes fingers to keyboard or pen to paper is not the tool at that moment.
Yeah.
But for me, it's allowing that wax and wane, that in and out, because flow is not linear.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, I think that developing different tools in order to access different things, for me, with my background in history, emotions were never safe. So emotions are fuel. So you don't experience emotions, because when you experience emotions, you get in trouble. So if you come from that kind of background, you learn how to suppress, and that becomes your way of life. And then when you suppress, it's very easy because you can flip that switch and you're just like, I'm in survival mode. Cool. let's get going. And then you just kind of like move forward. And in order to tap into the emotional space, for the sake of everyone else, flow is when you're connected. So you can't be in flow if you're suppressing those emotions. If people tell you that they're in flow, it's bullshit. They're lying to you. But sorry for the language, but that's just what it is. It's the head-heart connection. And so in order to get that head-heart connection, there could be any array of tools. For me, as you were talking about doing movement, my default was movement, because my default was track and field. So the scientist will tell you that HIIT training is really good to like the mind-body connection. Well, for me, that's not truth, because I learned how to override that. So for me, for you, tapping into that creative flow might be doing a workout. For me, that's survival mode. My tapping into my emotions to get that alignment is writing. And so it's, I mean, everyone's different, right? This is the beauty of the world.
Yes, totally. Totally.
So I think that's important, that illustration that you just made is super important for people to kind of understand that, like, number one, understand what is like your default and what is like the main go-to for different things. And then two, like, start getting curious about developing different tools. So for you, if you already had if you already had like the creative background, even if it was a muted creative, you still had that creative outlet. And then being able to find different tools to kind of tap into that sustainable, wellness. Snaps to you, because I think it's very important, focusing on the nutrition, focusing on the, again, it's all for balance, right? Focusing on that movement, focusing on the meditation, focusing on, tapping into like that creative side. So good for you, Meg. I'm so proud of you.
Thank you. I think we don't appreciate the value of the micro tools. A couple of minutes of yoga breathing, or a couple of minutes of pulling off your socks and shoes and putting them on the grass. Those little things, when, as you say, the HIIT training or going for a run or whatever is not working, or talking to a friend's not working, all of these things that the default instruction is go to this, go to that. And the more of those tools that you've got, the better, because you'll just keep working through until you get to one. I'd even go as far as to say, put the list on the fridge, and just go, you know what, I'm really in a funk. Hit me with some ideas, and you look at the list and go, nah. Oh, yeah, I could do that one. It sounds so simple and so almost dumb, but you have to prompt yourself like that. Like you're almost mothering yourself in the sense of taking away the thinking, because it's the thinking that creates the snowball. And if you look at the studies around thought processes and one thought joining onto another, we're talking 15 to 20 seconds before one thought joins the next and the next, and before you know it, you've got a cascade of either good or bad
absolutely
energy and flow.
Absolutely, because like the thoughts become words and the words become things. You manifest your reality in every single second, and that's why you always have to kind of be really careful about mind your thoughts. And I think it's very powerful too, like as a mama bear, congratulations for that as well, and happy Mother's Day again. I think that it's an incredible way for you to not just teach it to your child, but to demonstrate it in practice. Because I feel that a lot of parents, they can say, do as I say, not as I do, right? But here you are actually practicing something so that your child can understand not just the word that you're saying, but how to implement it as part of their daily, or how to help themselves. Because I agree with
Yes.
you, routines are important. Motivation is fleeting. And then
Mm.
routines are important as a default to
Mm.
keep on the path, right? And again,
Yes.
everything's for wellness. So if you're
Yes.
in a space where you're managing all these different things, family life, professional life, mental health, all these things, and your child is just starting their journey, you're empowering them with different tools of like, oh, hey, okay, what is mom doing? And what can I do to also
Mm.
fill my toolbox of different things? Especially,
Yes.
I love that visual and that concept of having that list on your, almost like grocery list
Mm.
on your refrigerator.
Exactly.
Because then when you go through it,
Yeah.
it's, when your mind is clogged, it gives you, something that you can go through, and that's empowering, because I'm sure a lot of those different tools are easy for adults just as they are for children.
Yes,
So
definitely.
snaps
Definitely.
for you. Good job.
Sorry,
That's like next level.
sorry, yeah, but I'm so sorry to interrupt, but I just need to grab something really quick. I'm tired. I woke up at 4:30 in the morning, so I'm gonna grab some coffee and I'll be right back.
Absolutely.
Okay,
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I
And
think being open to the different teachings of lots of different people, and not necessarily experts in mental health per se, but people
yeah.
who have worked through something challenging and have
Mhm.
got particular strategies, and then can reverse engineer to say, okay, this is what worked, this is what didn't. People like Tony Robbins and,
Yeah.
that whole camp.
Absolutely. Yeah,
And then,
experience is important. I mean, we talk about in a
yes.
professional setting, it's okay, the degree and everything is going to get you
Mm.
at the table or the interview, but then people want to know your experience to make sure that you can
Yes.
actually hack it, because theory
Yes.
and experience is two completely different schools.
Exactly. And if I use him as a prime example, he has the same genetic condition that I do.
Yeah.
This undermethylation, which affects the neurotransmitter, same thing.
Yeah.
And look at him.
Yeah.
I'm not chasing that as my own personal mission, but again, micro versions of the same thing,
Yeah.
and like and things that have been successful tools for thousands of years, i.e., yoga and meditation and that philosophy.
Mhm.
I think we're starting to touch on it in schools in Australia, and I'm not sure about the US there, but around teaching children mindfulness, teaching
Mhm.
them how to meditate in
Yeah.
elementary school, primary
Yeah.
school, rather than waiting for them to hit adulthood
Yeah.
and then have to cycle back and figure out how to undo
Yeah.
whatever they've accumulated over their growth period.
Absolutely. We have so much like social conditioning, and we have so much trying to
Yes.
fit into the round hole, right? So we got all these square pegs trying the
Yes.
hardest to fit into these round holes, and then they realize,
Yes.
well, actually, I don't know if this is working. And then you need to
Mm.
be
Mm.
unique and show your strengths and stuff like that. And so it's interesting, because I think a lot of people, they spend so many years conditioning themselves, or society conditions them to play a certain role, and then it takes time to unlearn all of that and strip away all of the aspects of conditioning to kind of find your own path. And so I think
Yes.
you see that with so many different aspects, whether it's professional people being Asian, going the path of being a doctor, and engineer, or lawyer, one of these things that you don't disappoint your
Yes.
family. And
Yes.
then how many within that space, how many people struggle with mental health because their suicide rates are higher. They're not living in their authenticity. They're doing stuff because of social programming, right, or the conditioning. And then you see it with athletics. A lot of people use athletics in order to get out of like their situation. I mean, it's not that anything's good or bad, it's what works for you, right?
Yes.
And so I think the
Yes.
fact that you're already mindful of the social conditioning and the nuances for your son is what makes you an incredible mama bear. So congratulations.
you.
Another big compliment on that aspect too.
Thank you. I think, and I can recall somebody saying to me a few years ago, that yes, you can be expressive and speak your truth on social media,
Mhm.
not because you can retract it at at a blink of an eye, but simply because, the nature of the tool. But even then, people were saying to me, don't share too much. Don't, like, you've built this strong corporate image. Don't bring yourself unstuck by showing all your flaws or showing that there's some kind of weakness in the system. I didn't stop posting week in, week out on social. Once I started to build the business that I'm in now, I was day in, day out, at least 5 days a week on the front-facing side of things, until we hit the COVID lockdown in May, June last year. I was absolutely tied to that routine for fear of who knows what. And then everything stopped. Every single piece of our lives here stopped. And that's the first time in years that I took a step back from publishing. So I think there's a lesson in that from a mental health perspective, not because you need a pandemic to be the tipping point, but to recognize that even when you are successful as a mother, as a business owner, and from the outside world's perspective, as a content creator, that we have this real fear around what's going to happen if we don't show up when people expect us to. I love the fact that if I drop off from publishing, that people will get in touch with me within a couple of weeks and say, look, we're so used to seeing you, what's going on? But not because I need the ego stroke, just because I know that people are in tune with my publishing cycle. But it's really hard to let go of that, what you've built up incrementally. Really hard. You've got this reputation, your definition of what people think of you. So I would say, as part of your flow, as part of your creativity and everything else that you do, even if you've worked really hard to build up a certain number of followers and a certain traction in terms of leads or whatever, if it's just not working, people can smell the stickiness. They can feel the stickiness of what you're publishing. If you are not in your natural state, if you show up to grind something out, we can feel it, even if the words say something different. So I don't know. The pandemic taught me a lot, I think, in giving myself permission to stop completely and to let go of maybe losing 100 followers or something like that, because I wasn't meeting their criteria for what it meant to be.
Quality. Always go for quality over quantity. Always. Always. So there's two things that I want to kind of unpack as part of that. So we talk about stigma with you as an adult, and the stigma, with mental health in context of the corporate side. You can talk about it, but don't talk about it. It's like generally speaking, the social norm. What is the social stigma in terms of children? Is this something that the school is kind of like supportive of, or is it something that they're like, like how is it embraced for children with mental health nuances?
I think it's better than it was, but it still gets diverted. And credit there in that there are more resources for it to be diverted to, more early intervention and things like that. But most average schools don't have the structure to handle more than a very slight shift from what they deem to be the normal. So I think a lot of kids fall through the cracks in that sense. Hence the reason that we as parents or as mums need to really first manage ourselves and then be able to share the tools.
Absolutely.
It's challenging, and I'm very grateful that I'm going to say high school to us, because it begins in year 7 here, high school. For my son, it's his first year away from elementary school, and his school is exceptionally good at those identifications
Yeah.
and putting people into certain groups so that they can get more intensive support while still being within
Yeah.
a school of 1,000 kids.
Mhm.
So, but others don't have that resource,
Yeah.
and it's frustrating. It puts a lot of strain on parents to manage it entirely,
Yeah.
and the parents then burn out and their own mental health suffers, and off you go. It's the
Yeah.
spiral again.
Absolutely. Absolutely. No, I think it's important, because I think there's a certain element of personal accountability whenever you're talking about mental health. At the same time, in parallel, you also have the social support.
Yes.
So you can't have the social support without the personal accountability. You can't have the personal accountability without the social support. So it's two sides that actually work together in order to make this entire ecosystem of
Yes.
of wellness. At least in my experience and in my personal journey, that's always been like the important component for that balance.
Yes, I love the term ecosystem, because it really is. It really is. And I think that doesn't necessarily have to be all other humans. It can simply be music or nature or animals or whatever it happens to be, or just getting the best possible, cleanest food that you can, whatever. The ecosystem of your own personally designed mental health strategy, like you were talking about hydration earlier on and things like that.
So important.
That's the stuff, even if you're not an athlete, that's the stuff that, if we nail that early on, just like, when I was growing up, sunscreen, skincare for sun protection and things like that. The UV in Australia is crazy. And we have a very strong campaign around protecting yourself from the sun because of the high rates of skin cancer here. Things like hydration feel to me like they should be part of the same intensity in terms of education, to recognize how it affects your mental processes, how it affects your physical performance, all those things. And I'm not coming from a position of professional expertise, but
we're basically plants with emotions. We need sunlight and water, and then we need space to express ourselves. That's basically as simple as we get. And when we're talking about mental health, I think going back to my experience of high school, we never talked about mental health. We never talked about anxiety, depression, like suicide. Like we never talked about stuff like this. It was, I graduated in 2002. So maybe I'm dating myself in that, in terms of like social norms and social acceptance and social openness. At the same time, I think mental health was always the behavioral disorder group. So that was a stigma for me growing up. And it was just like, okay, you're, I don't know, it could be anything from children with autism, different learning disabilities or aggression issues. For all we knew at the time, it could have been people from broken homes that didn't have the tools for emotional regulation. And that's why they were lashing out. I mean, you don't know what you don't know. All you know is that was the behavioral disorder group. And it's sad because it wasn't even these are the special needs. Special needs would be gentle, right? And kind of like welcoming and encouraging, whereas these are the behavior disorders. Well, I mean, and that's the framing. That's what I remember, from high school. And it's not me framing it. I'm a little same disposition person. I'm like, oh, you need a friend? Let's be friends. It was just like, why are they? How come they have to go to different classes? How come, their classes are only 5 or 6 people, and, or, stuff like that. You take notice, but you don't really get too close, because it's, I don't know, it's not something that is like part of like the norm. So it's nice that you are talking about and referencing that it's a little bit more open, and the kids are having, the children are having like opportunities to like develop tools. So that's pretty awesome. The second thing that I kind of wanted to touch on is, you mentioned about the pandemic has taught you a whole bunch of lessons on kind of like your self-awareness and self-regulation, and kind of maintaining that ecosystem within in order to balance that ecosystem, around. And to me, coming from trauma, it's easy for me to put my head down and just grind. That's default. And so
Yes.
for some people that's default. And if you don't realize that that's your default, this is where you get into burnout because you're stressed, you fall into it, and it's like, boom, wait, what? And
Yes.
so if that's not your default, that's different because then you get stressed out as the process goes. But when you're, if it's your default, you just get exhausted because you're like, oh, I can't remember the last time that I ate something normal. And I probably haven't been sleeping, but I got to hit these deadlines. And you find that energy to kind of tap in. So like has pandemic kind of been a little bit more of that, nature, or what was the, like, how did you come to needing to step back and get that balance? It was just kind of, I don't want to say manic because it's the wrong word, but grind mode, like where you just grind, and then it was like, hold on, let's pause, or what was going on?
It was grind, but it was layering, it was, and making gross assumptions about what needed to happen to get an outcome. I need to do this to get to point A. People need to see me post 5 days a week in order for me to maintain my presence. I need to get this, I need to get that, not I would prefer or I want or whatever.
It's clouding the lines between your internal world and your external world.
Yes. And that fear of losing ground, like having worked and fought tooth and nail to get to a certain level of presence, because I did work long hours and do all sorts of crazy stuff in the early days to get things elevated enough that they would start to create their own momentum. So there was massive fear around letting any piece of that go, because it was like watching a house of cards in my head.
It's your baby. It's your baby. You have like a physical baby, and your company is your baby too. So it makes 100%. It's logical. It makes sense.
And not only that though, but it was the position that I had created for myself, telling other people that was what they needed to do, as an educator that says, as a content creator or as a social media presence, you need to do these things. And then who am I to turn around and do the opposite?
So that's integrity, right? So it's being able to walk your talk, because if that's what you're preaching, you should be able to practice it. So in terms of being able to adjust, I'm not normal, so maybe I shouldn't be sharing this. I shoot from the hip. I don't do edits to my videos. I just get inspired. I hit record. I twinkle my fingers, literally sprinkling magic through the computer screen in my head. This is what makes sense. And then I share a message that's in my heart. And I don't deal with social media strategies or any of that. In corporate, I did. But for me, as part of my personal journey, I flow with it. So if you ask me, well, what are we going to talk about in 2 weeks? I have no idea. I don't know how I'm feeling even right now. And so to me, that's part of, being able to get in touch with my flow, because I was so detached from how I was actually feeling to be in survival mode, that part of what makes me, I guess, authentic is being able to not script anything and just hit record. Oh, I feel inspired. Okay, let's hit record, and then be able to go with it. So understanding, different processes like work for different people and stuff like that. Did you have to shift from kind of getting into that actual moment to maybe creating like longer term strategies? Like, say, for example, if you're feeling it, then maybe you can do a whole bunch of different things to kind of like line up. Is that something that would be like, that was useful to you? Or do you kind of shoot from the hip like me?
I think I sat with that question or a version of that. And I think the conclusion I came to was in order to serve the people that I work with and to enable myself to have some momentum, it's really, as you say, tapping into those moments where you are inspired to a point. Because the majority of the people that I come across generally don't feel that free. There's a lot of blockage going on here in terms of voice. And
you get scared and you're just like, oh, I'm playing big. Now I'm scared. Let me sabotage myself. And then you got this crazy dance going on. I get it.
And it depends on your audience, but for most of the people that I was working with, particularly in the early days of the business, I leveraged the audience that I'd already cultivated in corporate, which was professional services, who are notoriously quite structured and
all about
dare
delivery.
I
It's
say
all,
conservative.
yeah. It's all
They
about
didn't.
delivery. They don't care about flow. It's about delivery, execution.
Yes.
That's all that matters.
Yes. So to tell an audience like that, look, if you don't feel it, fine. The boss is going to go, no, you need to show up.
Yeah.
And secondly, if you feel it, then just shoot from the hip, just speak from your heart. Again, we don't do that.
Yeah.
So the only piece that I was able to really get them to double down on was saying, when you are in flow, milk it for all it's worth.
Yeah.
That doesn't necessarily mean just show up and ad lib. It
Yeah.
does mean, though, that you just keep creating, even if it's offline,
Lean
over
in.
and over and over again,
Lean in.
until you run out of juice. Yes.
Absolutely.
Until something diverts your attention. Just do whatever you can. And that's what I apply myself.
Yeah.
So if I get inspired by something, I use voice dictation these days rather than writing things down, because I know the mind is working faster than the fingers a lot of the time.
Absolutely.
And you'll come up with 20 ideas. And then the next day you'll think to yourself, well, I'm not feeling like there's something new coming. You've got that to refer back to.
Yeah.
Even if you haven't turned it into something, you've got a thought starter.
Yeah.
I'm a massive believer in the thought starters. Just put a sentence down or a word or
word dump. Word dump.
Absolutely. And visual. I'm more auditory than visual, but I know a lot of people are highly visual.
Yeah.
So, build a Pinterest board or an Instagram account that is just soul nourishing.
Yeah.
Something that you just keep adding beautiful things to, and then you go look at that.
Yeah.
Absolutely. To just fire things up, whatever that looks like.
Yeah.
But yeah, sometimes you just have to work within the confines of what the audience is able to do professionally. If they're not business owners and have a little more fluidity with what they're creating, or, the throat chakra is a little bit, blocked.
That's when you can divert the energy. You're like, it's not your throat chakra, it's your finger chakra. Wink.
Oh, yeah. Look, I'm sure.
You gotta type it out.
There's a portion,
yes. Type it out.
Yes.
I'm kidding.
There's a portion of my audience that would get that totally. But it's just, and look, some people just don't want to hear it.
Yeah.
Some people do not want to hear it. And, that's what kept me stuck for a long time, to the point where I made myself physically sick, not with mental health issues, but simply, well, that was already in the background, but things manifesting physically in your body, spinal things or other muscular things, or chronic headaches or chronic insomnia, or anything that was your body's way of saying, look, for God's sake, will you let this rubbish out of your system, or we will make you.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And
absolutely. I think like anytime that it would be, so having my athletic background, I think the body, there's plenty of books. The Body Keeps the Score. It's a trauma book to help you understand, where everything is being kept in the body. Growing up with athletes in the family, we have a lot of hockey players. So intense, you're traveling a lot, you're working really hard. My brother was a soccer player and a baseball player. I did track. And so you're constantly, have all these different types of athletes around, right? And it's interesting because, as you mentioned, when you don't take care of here, you can't always see things. You can't always quantify if something's going right or wrong, because maybe you're clouded, but you can say, oh, I'm tired. You justify everything, right?
Yes.
And then in terms of your heart, it's like, oh, maybe today's just a little bit off. And so it's very difficult to quantify. With your body, you can't. Like you're fit or you're not. You got to pay that rent every day. You got to, drink that water. You got to eat that right food. You got to, get that movement in. There's no faking health with the body. You will always see it, whether or not it's from an athletic perspective or just from a sedentary perspective. And so you're going to get like those aches and pains. You're going to, crack that neck. That's one of my tells. As soon as I crack my neck, I'm like, all right, I'm tense. I need to evaluate my surroundings because I'm about to lose it. Because like crack the neck, rotate or flare the nostrils like cartoon character. And then about 3 seconds later, I'm like, ah. But it's important, because to me, like other people, they might keep that stress in like their hips or something. For me, I keep it in my neck. And even though I do 3 hours of cardio type activities almost on a daily basis, I'm pretty nimble. Like I shouldn't have cracking, creaking necks. But again, if this is clouded or if this is clogged out of nowhere, it's
Yes.
like, oh, 5, 6, 7, 8, what? I just got one right now. And so the body is
Yes,
incredible. And it's also a good way to gauge on how, how you're feeling. If you can't figure out fear, you
definitely.
just look, what's happening in your body.
Mm,
So
definitely.
I'd like to commend you on that. I also want to commend you on the fact that not only do you walk your talk, but you practice, you practice what you preach. You can frame it however you want. I think the important thing to kind of pull it back is because of your mental health journey, it gave you an opportunity to understand and be in tune with yourself a little bit earlier. That was like your catalyst to understand what works for you, which makes you such an impressive and successful business person, because you had those tools. You have the tools for, I don't know, the actual technique or the operational side, right, from corporate. But then in
Yes.
terms of like the balance, the balance of the tool set for the alignment or the flow or the personal integrity or the authenticity, you can use any buzzword, right? That comes from knowing yourself. And so I want to, kind of hold space and pull us back a minute to just like honor the fact that you being able to do your own work to empower yourself through your own mental health journey is one of the biggest contributing factors for the success of your company and also the success of your clients. So I just want to honor that for a quick second.
Thank you. Thank you. I think there's so much that we can, if we allow ourselves to let go of it.
Yeah.
And for me, an aspect of that after I left my marriage was letting go of the material comforts, the things that I had worked and we had worked to create, the home that I had micromanaged the renovation of to be exactly what I want it to be. Those sorts of things, and to walk away from just choices that you got so used to having, freedoms that you got used to having, comforts. And I realized pretty quickly that I could live with a lot less materially. And still to this day, I haven't tried to, I pushed at it for a while and it was going in the right direction. And then I thought, heck, one of the big things for Aussies, it was coined the Australian dream, was to own your own home. Now, anywhere outside of Australia, that's much further from arm's length than it is here. It's been relatively attainable for a lot of Aussies for longer than my lifetime. But I started to question one of those foundational things that I had been brought up to aspire to was to own a property. And now I just look back at it and go, well, I did it and it was good. But heck, what a millstone ultimately. Do I choose that one? Yeah, it works for some people. Right now I don't. I'm quite happy to be a floater, as we would call it, and
attached to nothing, connected to self, connected to everything, attached to nothing.
Yes. Doesn't mean that I don't still like nice things, but it means that I'm not willing to sacrifice my mental health, my physical health, to attain them. I'd rather earn $1,000 less and be able to spend more time in nature with my son, with personal development, whatever the thing happens to be at the time. And I'm taking on new things all the time as a result, because I've let go of the need to have a certain dollar on my bank statement, or a certain number of hours clocked up on social media or whatever it happens to be.
And it's interesting too, because when you put it into that perspective, isn't it interesting on how when we let go of the grind component and we let go of the assumptions and the control of what we think we should be doing, and we just make ourselves available to, all right, universe, what do you got in store for me today? It just opens up a lot more like possibilities. Like, I honor and I appreciate a lot of things about you, Megan. And one of the biggest ones coming out of my heart right now is your ability to kind of get lost in what I consider a whimsical life. I think a lot of your writing is pretty whimsical, and I think a lot of that is
Yes.
because you're present, whether it's being out in nature, hanging out with, you know, your child, hanging out with animals. I don't remember where you posted that. Maybe it was on your Instagram, but there was something with animals. I don't remember. I'm like sensitive to something. With dogs. I feel like we would learn a lot if everyone behaved like dogs. Unconditional butt wags and, like, you know, big hugs and stuff like that. Maybe the butt sniffing might get us into trouble, but outside of that, I think everything would be okay.
Totally.
But I think your life is very whimsical, and I think an important nuance to kind of highlight for the benefit of everybody is, in order to get into that whimsical space, you have to be present. And when you're present, you're no longer in your depressive state, because when you're in your depressive state, you're kind of twirling around in the past, and when you're in an anxious state, you're twirling around in the future. But when you can't be whimsical when you're in the past, you can't be whimsical when you're in the future, but you can be whimsical when you're in the present moment. So I would like to bring some clarity to that, because you as a person manifest whimsical, you popularize being whimsical on a regular basis. And maybe you're too close to understand that, but that's something that I think a lot of people admire about you. That's why when you go missing, people are like, wait, where's our whimsical Megan? Like, where's she at? Like, what? Lady in red, come back.
Yes. Oh, look, I love that that term. I think that I've often been termed quirky.
That's a good adjective.
Unconventional. You know, that confronts or challenges a lot of people, especially on LinkedIn. Maybe less so these days. You know, we've let go a bit of that, but it always absolutely warms my heart to hear that people do connect with that, because it is, whim is the word sometimes, even though there's a method to the madness. What it often openly looks like a very tangential, you know, thing, and that I'm somehow just pulling a crazy idea out and not filtering it, and people think I'm being too emotional, or, you know, I'm revealing everything that's going on for me, good, bad, or ugly, in what I write. But that's what I admire in other writers outside of the professional context. You know, if I choose to pick up a novel, it won't be something that is horror or drama or whatever. It will be something that is based on fantasy and imaginary worlds and things like that. That's where the juice is for me. Things that have no bearing on the real world at all. The more fantastical, the better.
I mean, if we do like a deep dive kind of more in like a philosophical context, if you think that the soul is having a human experience, then, you know, this is where you can very easily go into a whole bunch of different rabbit holes of, all right, well, what kind of experience do I want to have right now? Do I want to have, you know, an experience that's going to be a little bit more difficult or turbulent? Do I want to have an experience that's going to be a little more whimsical? Do I want to have an experience where, I don't know, like, I mean, you can action packed. I mean, you can have anything you want, right? And that's connects back to what you're talking about with the thoughts become words, words become things, right? And so you have to be very careful of, you know, what's happening kind of in the space between your two ears, because that's going to be your external world. At the same time, it's also mining your external world, because it has an influence over your internal world. And so I think, you know, you hit the nail on the head, like pretty soundly with all of that, on being able to simultaneously manage both sides. So good for you. Good for you. And I think a lot of people, they also struggle with being able to see different perspectives. So a lot of times people are just so granular that they can only see, this is what you do. What's my list? What do you mean, what's your list? Your list is to understand yourself, and you create your own list. Yeah, I'm not gonna give you a list, and people get upset with that. And then, but then once you understand self-mastery, then you are able to kind of flow with wherever you need to go, because again, what works for you is not going to work for me. What works for me is not going to work for you. But if people get a little bit too granular into that, they lose context of what is like the end goal. And so for you, sharing, you know, what could be dubbed as an emotional purge, this is your process. People should be thanking you for front row seat into your processing.
Yes.
So, because a lot of people, you know, not the why, but the how. That's what I charge big bucks for.
Yes. Look, it's it takes time. You know,
Yeah.
the process will be quicker for some people than others, but for me, it's taken time, and it's it's required a lot of my own unpicking the process and unpicking the things that you accumulate over a lifetime to recognize, what sort of conditioning I was operating within, and to recognize the psychosomatic things. If I'm getting this going on in this part of my body, what does that represent on a more holistic or spiritual level? Louise Hay talks a lot about that kind of thing. If it's your neck, it's this. If it's your shoulders, it's this. And again, not an expert, but I see it translate over and over again. And we're so quick to, slap a cream or a tablet or whatever happens to be onto these things, even if it's just a rash.
Yeah, it's a Band-Aid. It's not actually a root cause.
There's a reason.
Band-Aid.
Yes. And look, I'm not the poster child for always latching onto things straight away by any means. Sometimes I do have to go through you've had a feather, you've had a brick, you've had a truck, and I don't respond till I get the truck.
Yeah.
But I'm still standing, so the truck didn't win.
Absolutely. Well,
ultimately.
Again, I think, big compliment to you. I think, in terms of you as a human being, and in context of, the entire mental health extravaganza and why we're even having this conversation, I think it's shedding light onto kind of you as a person, and what has worked for you, and what are like your foundational pieces in order to have like your successful health, number one, successful family, number two, and then successful business, number three. And a lot of people can struggle singular with one, and being able to have that balance with all three, I think from an external, like an outside perspective, I think you do it flawlessly. I think you do it extremely gracefully. So I'd like to, be able to honor that. Thank you. Big compliment to you. And I think, this is something you shed a lot of light, just to kind of, quickly recap, because I want to be mindful of time, because you got to run your business too. So I think, in order to kind of oversimplify all the different things that we've kind of gone through is, being able to be a patient advocate, make sure to take your health into your own hands, being able to constantly ask questions, have that curiosity, make a decision on what type of life you want to have for you, knowing that you have a child that is watching you, not just listening to you. Could be one of like your big driving factors to make sure that you're walking your talk, which ends up being one of the strongest foundational pieces to your business as well, because it's important. I think it's important for any, business owner, but specifically if you want to be a successful one, you got to walk your talk.
Yes.
And then also being able to balance all the different tools. So the big, like nugget, I mean, there's so many nuggets in this, and I'm gonna have so much fun putting subtitles on. The big nuggets will also be, just having like that list that you can put on your refrigerator as like that default. So if you feel that you're kind of getting a little bit out of whack, try checking with yourself. But then if you can't, check out your refrigerator door or your wall or nightstand or something like that, and just have that list kind of handy to help you out.
Yeah, look, the more anchors or frameworks that you can have, the better, because everybody's going to have moments where they need to latch onto that. And I think if you can remove the thinking from it and just know that you've got them, so that you can set your sights on them wherever you turn. And they're entirely of your own doing. You're not dependent on a partner or a family member or somebody being present to have a debrief with, or to have a phone call with. That makes it that much easier. And then you just go through the mental list. What's going to work now? What's available to me in this spot? And maybe it is just going to the bathroom and allowing yourself to sit for 10 minutes and, do some nostril breathing or whatever it happens to be. You work with what you've got. But if you've got many things to draw on, then that becomes more accessible. And even, I know more recently, mantras have become massive for me. And I just create them as I go along. I get them given to me by, my spiritual teachers, but I create my own as well. And something that just has 3 phrases or 3 words or whatever it happens to be, and being able to go, no, let's not play that game. Let's go back to A, B, C. To the point where you can hear 2 voices in your head, and one of them is going to win. So let's just make the one that's chanting the mantra a bit louder than the one who isn't.
Absolutely. It's whatever voice you're going to feed. It's whatever voice you're going to feed. I mean, it's everything gets manifested from the head into into like the real world. And so if you have the devil and the angel on your shoulders, you're like, all right, devil, like knock it off. Like, we'll get to you in a minute, but like, yo, angel, what you got for us today? And you just amplify that voice a little bit. I think like what was coming up in my head is a visual for a lot of people, for the visual people, it would be feet on the floor and head in the clouds. I think that is a perfect description for you, because it's the balance of being able to stay grounded, but also whimsical. I'm giving you whimsical.
I love that. I love that. Yes.
Megan is whimsical. And so she accepts it. Megan is whimsical. She's like magical beyond, she's a divine human being and soul. And so I think, kind of, we've touched on like a lot of like the business components as well, but so yes, you're in LinkedIn. That's like one of your main playgrounds, which I think is amazing. It's my favorite playground too. How can people get in touch with you? Because you're hosting, you do workshops, you have, clients that you work with one-on-one, individual clients like business owners, and then you also work with corporate clients. What are some of the things that you got in the pipes that people can jump on board and hire you for?
Yes, most of what I'm doing now is happening behind the scenes, because we had to work within the confines of lockdown, and then other restrictions for so long. A lot of physical in-room events, people are still reluctant, even if they're available now. People are still reluctant to attend. So everything I do, almost everything, is via Zoom. And a lot of those things are going into individual organisations. So a particular executive or a particular team, a marketing team, for example, where they just want to spend 2 hours and really hit it hard. And associations where they want me to talk to the member base for an hour or something like that. And that tends to be where people need me the most at the moment. And look, LinkedIn is 9 times out of 10 the best way to find me, because even if I'm not visible in the news feed, I'm in the background there, and I'm more likely to check that than anything else. I think I open that app before I open my email in the morning. So
same.
Yes.
It's important that's the community that you pour your love into and you pour your soul into. So so any like businesses, international, because we're international time now with the virtual world, any companies that are looking for marketing support or branding support or just kind of visibility, these are the ones that can reach out to you for a boost in authenticity and a boost in, once you're in alignment, your message. That's a secret to the sauce. It's a very complex process. It's a simple concept, but this is what you specialize in, is helping people do that and go through that journey.
It is. Cool. It is. And I guess to sharpen that point more than people that because it's the walk that I'm taking now, the people that I work with more and more now tend to be more on the holistic side. It's less of the suits and more of the yoga teachers and the Reiki masters and those kinds of things. They're increasingly becoming my tribe more than the lawyers and accountants. Not that I don't love a few of the lawyers and accountants, but that's less of my world these days. And there's so much more juice to be had when you write from your own experience.
Absolutely. I mean, as long as everyone comes with the intention to try to have that growth, I think wherever they're coming from is irrelevant, as long as the finish line is more or less the same. So I think that's amazing. So, okay. So what is your favorite, because I ask everybody so far, what is your favorite go-to? Because you mentioned mantras as being like an important part.
Yes.
What is your favorite mantra at this exact moment that maybe you can share with everyone for Mental Health Awareness Month?
Yes. A little self-designed one, and it is simply, I am source, I am love, I am divine feminine power.
I love it.
And, to just rotate through and use the power of 3, which if you're in that side of things, you know all about that. You know, and just keep rotating through that, and that it becomes your anchor. You know, I love the more traditional ones as well that are you know, come from Sanskrit, but that for me at the moment is very personal to me. So
yeah, I love it. I love it. I think it's very powerful. It's very inclusive. It demonstrates like a journey, not just like stagnation, but it's, you know, like being able to move, because I think a lot of times we get so fixated on like finish lines, or we get so fixated on where we're supposed to go that we forget to kind of enjoy the journey, you know, along.
yes.
So the I am source component, you know, to me is empowering, because it reminds us that it doesn't matter what machine we're plugged into, because we are our own machine, because if we are source, to me that's the interpretation that I get from that. So if that's like the base of, you know, I am source, I'm like, oh yeah, like, that's pretty magical. And then what was the second part was I am love. And then I am love, that helps us connect with heart, my personal opinion. So that's like, you know, of embodiment of where we operating from. So yes, I'm powerful. Now where am I operating from? And then the last one,
divine feminine power and divine feminine power.
Divine feminine power is actually good for both society-based male and female, because for male, the males, it's allowing them to be more gentle and graceful, which isn't a natural society norm, because stoicism is associated with masculinity. So tapping into that feminine power, I think, is amazing. And then for feminines, it's almost kind of like the opposite, because sometimes for empowerment, we oversimplify that we have to tap into that masculine energy without realizing that our power is actually in that feminine energy, and then having that balance. So it's giving us permission to be who we are. So I think that's those are three, my interpretation of it. So please forgive me. But I think that is a very beautiful mantra to share for mental health awareness. So Megan, thank you so much for being able to share. Again, for everybody, Megan is a fantastic soul. She is having the most phenomenal human experience. She is dazzling and tantalizing us with so much whimsical magic on LinkedIn, and helping empower, you know, individuals and companies take, you know, everything to the next level, you know, through like a process of alignment and then exposure. And I'm so tickled that you agreed to, you know, have a little jam session and share all your tips and tricks and kind of what happens behind the scenes to allow you to maintain that balance, where you're able to not only focus on your own mental health and wellness journey, but also raising an emotionally and mentally balanced child, which is a feat in itself. And then also running a successful business, and from what it sounds like, making a very strong pivot during a pandemic, which is extremely impressive. So Megan, congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you. Look, I stand by the idea that if you can share one thing that somebody didn't know before, then they've benefited from the experience. So if one nugget comes out of this for the listener, then I'm happy.
Absolutely. Well, happy International Mental Health Day. And again, happy Mother's Day, or happy Mother's Day. And thank you so much.
Pleasure. Thanks, Jess.